So, I wanted to talk a bit about the concept of apologies. I had a feeling that I should say something about this for some reason or talk about something in this area, so we'll see where I go with this. Um, there are a couple of kinds of apologies that exist. Uh, One is apologizing for inconveniencing somebody else. Um, a very basic form of apology is just coming from the understanding that people are all in different timings and rhythms and modes in their life. And so these things are bound to overlap in conflicting ways. You're going to cause a problem in somebody's world from their point of view at some point by being yourself. You can get offended by that if you want, some people do, or you can see it simply as something that happens and apologize, excuse yourself essentially, because you're essentially creating a social deflection of whatever problem was created. Like, you're apologizing for interrupting the timing of their life, essentially. Now, you don't have to do this. It's not like totally necessary or anything. But people who are unwilling to apologize for inconveniencing other people are like often pretty difficult to get along with or be around, because they're probably, they're not considering other people's needs or their views or things like that. But people who demand an apology for things, or they're going to be upset, are difficult in their own way. Because fundamentally, apology doesn't really matter, it's just a word. And so what that ties into is people who are demanding things that aren't like super important from other people, but they say that they're important to them and their feelings. That That's difficult because they're making everybody in the world responsible for their feelings. And nobody else is responsible for your feelings but you ultimately. But we can help lift each other up or we can put each other down. Because each person has some concept of themselves in society, and often they connect that to their self-esteem. There are people who have learned not to do that, and that is very wise. It's wise not to care what other people think, but the mistake you can make there is to not be taking input from other people. You just don't care what they think to such a degree that you're not even registering their feelings at all. You don't care to that extent. So if you notice how people feel and you seek to understand why they'd feel the way that they do in their viewpoint, if you just want to be able to get it on some fundamental level, it's okay to not treat their feelings as something that is your responsibility. But at that level, it's okay to apologize too if you hurt somebody's feelings or do something they don't like. Because it doesn't take very much from you to say that, and it does mean a lot to people, especially people who are very sensitive. Like, people who get hurt easily. If you are unwilling to apologize to them for hurting their feelings, that will probably hurt their feelings, because all you have to do is say a literal word. You just have to say sorry. And if you have an issue of pride around it, or an issue of what's right and what's wrong and that sort of thing, this is where things get hairy, because if there's somebody demanding apologies from you, there are people who are very demanding, and you don't want to, be trying to figure them out all the time so that you don't hurt their feelings all the time. And it's like the opposite of walking on eggshells and making someone angry. It's like walking on eggshells because you don't want to hurt the person. It's a person who's in such a state of victimhood that they're making everybody around them, they're sort of like they're going, well, if I feel bad, then you have to feel bad too. And they're finding very clever ways to do that, essentially, without knowing how clever they're being, by creating a game between them and everybody else through their insecurities and making everybody make up the distance for those things if they want to have a loving relationship with them. And so everybody questions their concept of worth itself, because they go, well, I want this person to feel worthy. I don't want to hurt their feelings. And if I care about their feelings, I'll try not to hurt them to help them feel worthy, but they'll have an abyss in their self-esteem and their sense of worth anyway, because things are not going quite as they want them to. Or they got hurt at some point and they just don't know how to heal that wound. And so they're going to carry it with them no matter what, and it'll always be there. And so they'll be trying to get the world to accommodate that wound and heal it, but it can't, because they have to heal the wound. And that's why it's good not to, just give in to people with a victim identity. They need the tools to heal their wound, and one of those tools is recognizing that the world is not about them. It's about everyone. And until they're willing to see other people's thoughts and feelings and perspectives, which is what wounded people are often afraid of and don't want to see, but for wounded people, if I'm supposed to care about your feelings, then you better care about my point of view, because that is what I am as a person who is not wounded. Is I am a perspective. I am thoughts about things. And if those thoughts are not coming from a place of trying to wound somebody, then them recognizing that is the most healing thing they can do for themselves, if those thoughts are something that they find wounding. If they can find out how those thoughts are not some wounding thing, like inherently, then, healing can take place, because they were previously subconsciously, unconsciously not aware that they were open to being wounded by that thought and that sort of thing. And so I think I'm looping back now to somewhere I left off on a little bit of, an open-ended statement earlier. So I went off on a bit of a tangent. But I hope I'm clearing everything up, because the two kinds of apologies that there are is, if there's somebody who won't apologize, that person can be somebody who did something kind of shitty to you in the past, and they know it was shitty, and that they shouldn't have done it on some level, because they wouldn't do it anymore now. Like, they're just not that person anymore. But they're also not going to apologize for that thing, because apologizing for it means taking responsibility for it. They'll want you to kind of just move on. And they go, well, stuff happens, and they might forgive you for the things that you do or have done in that same vein. But a person like that, who's unwilling to apologize for the effect that they've had, doesn't want to necessarily, they might go, hey, I'd like to apologize to you because it might make you feel better. But they go, well, but then if I apologize, then it becomes about what's right and what's wrong, who's right and who's wrong. And suddenly, if they see themselves as in the wrong or as wrong, then they have to adjust to you, and that might not be something they're capable of doing. They may not know how to do that. They may not be ready to do that. And so they're sort of in this perpetual, sort of limbo between adulthood and childhood, where they've become an adult, and now, in terms of the actions that they would take, are adult actions at this point. But there's a childishness there, because they used to do childish things, and because they will not accept responsibility for those, they are either going to behave in somewhat of a childish way towards society, like there's going to be people they're just not going to see, they're not going to be willing to see, like vulnerable people especially, who are reflected in their lives in some way and that they don't feel responsible for if they helped create people who needed more somehow, like if they created a deficit in somebody in their life, like a child, right? And the other kind of person is somebody, it's not about their relationship to society where the childishness is, it's in their relationship to themselves. Because if they admit fault, then they have to permit other people to be who they are when they fundamentally rejected that on some level at some point. Now I know people like this. I'm describing people where I've seen this in before, and these are not bad people. That's not the point of that idea. There's an aspect that's like, oh, it's kind of a bad person. Because fundamentally, if you don't take responsibility for who you are and the things you do and the effect you have on people, that's like required for a bad person. That's the foundation of a bad person, somebody who doesn't take responsibility for the effect they have on people, either internally or externally. Like if you don't outwardly take responsibility or internally like register your effect and seek to do the thing that, and that's where things get complicated, is you know, like you can try to do what's right for the greater good or something like that, you know, and you can get confused, or you can try to do what's right for science, and maybe you're not paying attention to your kids because you're doing a lot of equations or something in your garage. And so there's a lot of different levels of this. But now let's swing to the other pole of people in terms of apologies. Because there are people who will apologize, but when they apologize, they maybe do the same thing again. Or they apologize and they don't necessarily seem to have registered like the lesson that they were supposed to in order to apologize. Like they're apologizing for upsetting you or hurting you or offending you or something, or they're apologizing because they feel like they have to. But what they're not really doing is apologizing for the core problem that they were the source of. And the problem with that is that they're not taking responsibility for it. And if it's something that they really believe in, they're not standing up for it because they're apologizing. And they're just not, you know, being true to themselves. In that case, they may just be reflexively doing it, so it doesn't mean a lot. And it is sort of a way of expressing that they're not really receiving the feedback from society. And in the very extreme, somebody can, you know, be extremely apologetic and just keep doing the same thing. Like they don't really, like they don't care. Either because they're scatterbrained or something like that. Or it can be intentional. It can be like they know that they're doing it and they really don't care. They don't care what other people think. They don't care what other people feel. They'll apologize as a mechanism to get certain feedback from people, emotional responses and stuff like that. But that's very extreme. Like that's sociopathy. That's what's like called narcissistic personality disorder, or you know, something like that. I don't know how much that applies to in that case. It's just, I think a narcissist is just somebody who is so in their own world and its own timing, and their world is just so much about them that they can easily not see other people or not endeavor to see other people or not care. But they're kind of magnetic because people like people who are being themselves and being about themselves, because there's an understanding that even though we kind of reject that idea as a society, it's like you shouldn't be about yourself, or, not always. Some people do. And it's not something to celebrate. Like, be about yourself. Like, yeah, don't care what other people think. But there is a way to celebrate it, which is fairly common in America and the American sort of upbringing, which is to tell people that you can be whatever you want. You can be whoever you want to be. And it's all right to dream. And if you're dreaming and if you're following your dreams and you're following your passion, you can do this in such a focused way where you're so much about your dreams that you don't really realize that you're not creating room for other people. You're just being about your dreams. And so if other people try to reach you and they try to come into that space, but they don't come in the way that fits your dream scenario, they don't come in the way that fits your vibration or your frequency or whatever, however you want to put it, you're not necessarily gonna receive, the world, like the world itself, the heart of the earth, the benefit of the world, of knowing people, of seeing people. And it depends, like you can reject a lot. You can reject viewpoints, you can reject thoughts, feelings. But what helps get around all this is if you embrace humanity instead. Remember to embrace people's humanity, embrace their hearts, go to the heart of who they are as a person. And part of the heart of people is that they are what we would call flawed. Like, it's very, very flawed to be human, just like fundamentally, because humanity in that way is not about you being you as a person. You're not flawed in that way. Like, you're you. It's fine to be you. Where you're flawed is in your relationship to other people, where you are always going to be flawed until you're not, until you've made like every single mistake you can make, or seen somebody else make those mistakes and learned every single lesson you can learn and been in every situation. Then from the point of view of humanity, you're not flawed anymore, because now you would never do anything that you would change later. And this isn't about regret, it's just about knowing how to behave and act and think and feel. And here's the other flaw, is that on a certain level, there is no right way to behave or think or feel. Because when you find out who you are, you might find out that it makes more sense to you to be somebody that other people find to be obnoxious or arrogant or rude or upsetting. Because you're just sitting there going, I'm tired of everybody's shit. I'm tired of their bullshit, and I'm tired of dealing with it. And I'm not going to go around aggressively, attacking people with that idea. But I'm really done, caring about what they have to say about me, or the way that I live, or how I do things, or how I should do things. Like the little modes that they create and the paradigms for how we're supposed to behave and think and feel that are meant to protect everybody's feelings, but are designed to protect the feelings of the person who is asking for protection and is creating that paradigm. And in that way, it's keeping people out who don't see things that way, don't think that way, don't feel that way, and that they find upsetting, like that it does not gel with them. It doesn't mesh with their, their vibration, their feeling of safety. And so they just will reject people who seem to not have the same mode of thought that they do, because different thought modes in human society are correlated directly with threat, essentially. Because people who think differently act differently. People who think differently might hurt you, might hurt somebody you care about, might hurt somebody you love, right? And so when people find like-minded people, they stick to those people and they go, this is my tribe, this is my group, these are my people. But the way that they define who is like-minded and what like-mindedness is itself closed-minded. It's myopic, it's not inclusive, it's not understanding. They're filtering out people who they don't feel compatible with, and that idea that they're creating may not necessarily be true. They might be filtering out people they would be compatible with if they were more open-minded, if they would broaden their world. And so it creates a rejection of people who don't think like them. And so they're demanding people to have the same perspective or get out, essentially. Get out of their little world. Get out of their acceptance bubble where they go, I accept people who think and feel and behave this way and not that way. And I'm not saying that that is a bad thing or a bad idea, like on the whole, but there is a cultural sort of a norm around doing that, where it's like, let's just wholesale reject anybody who thinks this way. Let's not listen to anything they have to say. Let's assume that whatever worth they have is zero. If they start talking a certain way, then it means that they are not, they can't be saying anything correct. They can't be saying anything that has any value. And that's just not true, because people, you grow from bumping into people. You grow from dealing with adverse circumstances. You grow from finding out that you can, not have woundedness or hurt feelings or feel vulnerable around people just because of their personalities, or just because they said something that makes you uncomfortable or have a thought that makes you uncomfortable. But at the same time, there are a lot of people coming out into the sort of the light of the planet at this point who do feel very vulnerable, like the trans community, right? Like, you got a lot of people who are dealing, the more questions somebody has about their identity, the more sensitive they're going to feel about people taking those questions lightly. Like, if to them the idea of transformation and transition is sort of a harrowing thing that's full of like sensitivity and woundedness, and then somebody else comes along and they're just like, oh, the idea of being like partway between genders is kind of, or the idea of being in transition in a body is funny because we just don't think of things that way, or we didn't think of things that way. Like, who you were was set, and then all of a sudden it's not set. And how we used language, how we used pronouns was set, and all of a sudden it's like not set. And so people will go, oh, the perspective, the feeling there is, oh, I want to protect my feelings. The trans community, people in those kind of groups, they go, I want to protect my feelings. Okay. But the perspective that's sort of lingering around that is, oh, isn't this all kind of interesting? Isn't this all, there's a lot to say about it. There's a lot to say about it, a lot of perspectives. And not all of them are going to be what people would consider to be fully understanding. But that alone does not make them, like evil. It doesn't mean those people are bad people. It just means that they think differently. And the thing is, by talking to them rationally, by treating them as people, by being inclusive, ironically, and going, hey, you think something that kind of hurts my feelings, but, like, I understand that's your perspective. Like, it's okay to have a perspective. It's like, okay, grandpa, you said some things that are, like, kind of outdated. Like, the way people do that, the way people used to do it, like when I was younger, because I'm 37, like, the way people used to do that is that they would say, oh, that's just grandpa. That's just how he is. The way people will do it now is they'll go, oh, that's outdated, and you need to change. Your perspective needs to change. Like, you're outdated. The way you're seeing things is wrong. And they'll say that to jokes, like people who are just making a joke, as if making a joke that hurts somebody else's feelings is a bad thing. It's like something that only a real asshole would do. And that's isolating for people, I think. It's isolating because they encounter people who are unreasonable to the point of telling them that they're downright evil for noticing like things that to them are funny to think about and say and are weird. And human society's been full of differences. This whole planet's whole history, people have been attacking each other for all sorts of things. And a lot of people have dealt with that, and the way that we used to be raised to deal with it. It's like when I was a kid, I don't know if kids even necessarily say this anymore, but they'd say, "Sticks and stones break my bones, but words will never hurt me." That's a way of dealing with people who think differently than you do. Like it's a magic statement that a lot of people could really stand to say. They really, really need to try that one out, with every viewpoint that bothers them, because that's how you find out if a viewpoint is bothersome because it's actually kind of vile, or if it's just something that they're saying, because a vile viewpoint is one that's suggesting doing something that's going to physically hurt somebody, that's going to cause like chaos, and in the sense of like it's people bringing the dogs out to go after each other. And there's a version of bringing the dogs out to go after each other, which is rejecting people for their perspective fundamentally, even if their perspective isn't about any bad thing we should do to anybody else. It just comes from a feeling that has something authentic and genuine to it, that might come from a place where they just don't have as expanded a worldview as other people might have. And so the point of all this is that it's all about integrating perspective. People who have hurt feelings have a perspective. And if you can integrate that, then maybe you can understand their hurt feelings and understand how to be gentle with them and be soft around them. But at some point, they might need a real perspective from you to help them, get perspective, so that they can have perspective instead of feeling about stuff. Because you don't want to have feelings about everything. Like, that's a nightmare. On the earth especially, there's so much polarity here. If you're constantly taking offense at the things that people say, constantly feeling hurt, constantly noticing how things are, out of phase with you, out of sync with you, and you just can't get along with or hate like all the people who don't think the way that you do, it's a terrible way to live. It's like a nightmare. You're putting yourself in jail for no reason when you could be free on the social planes to roam around with all the weirdos, like humanity is super, super odd. It's like the safari of the mind, it's just like people are super fucking weird. So anyway, that's my message. I would say get used to that, Get used to how weird people are. Get used to how strange it is. Because otherwise you're just being afraid of all the things that they could do, all the things that might happen. And you're projecting that fear onto them by trying to, stop the ones who don't think like you from reaching you. But that just means stopping thoughts that are different from yours from reaching you too. And if you stop the thoughts that are different from reaching you, then you stop the people who think kind of that way, but aren't really who you think they are, from reaching you too. And some of those people might be pretty cool people. They might be pretty interesting. They might have something to say that might make your life better, that might help you see more clearly. And then the other side is, of course, like if you kind of just go on a rampage all the time of just not caring what anybody else feels or not caring what anybody else thinks, like maybe take a moment to stop and realize that we're all human beings, and that caring about perspectives, no matter how outlandish or hurt they seem, is a good empathizing experience, because people have a tendency to kind of swing into looking at things as either right or wrong and going like, oh, this person deserved this because they were being a jerk or something, right? And that can be satisfying. Like, if you see somebody being really awful to everybody around them, then karma kind of comes and gets them, right? Then you're like, oh, well, I'm not gonna be upset about it. That happened, but it's still good to stop and look at the person, and instead of going, well, that was funny and enjoyable for me and gratifying, you can stop and go, well, that person must really be suffering too on some level. to behave that way, or they must be really out of touch, or there's just something going on with them, and it's like, oh geez, as a society it would be good if we could respond to whatever that is, and maybe we can't. Maybe we'd try to respond to them and it would just make them angrier, and so they'd go be angry and do angry stuff, and then maybe it would be really funny if something did happen. It's like, could you just see them like creating their own feedback in their life and getting a lesson for themselves, and you're just like, oh wow. that was like very quick, like instantaneous feedback. Whatever it is. I mean, it's not laughing at the things that happen in the world. If something bad happens, like, it's not the worst thing that happened that there was somebody laughing about it, Like they say, like, comedy, like, tragedy plus time equals comedy. To somebody, it's going to seem really funny to shorten that time to the shortest interval possible and just start laughing about things, no matter how terrible they are. And I do that with myself. Like, if something bad happens, I'll start laughing about it, like, immediately, because it's just absurd to me. I don't tend to do that with other people. But the point that I'm making is that other people's worlds, if there's going to be somebody out there with a perspective that is upsetting, if you want to be upset by something. But I'm just saying, there's no reason to want to be upset by perspective, because that's not really worth getting upset about. And with the actions that people take, that's where we all have a social contract with each other, where we have to work things out. And it's about finding the right way to coexist. And that's what apologies are for. And in apologies is the recognition that there are ways to get along with people, there are ways where we don't get along with people so well. But if you're not willing to apologize for the things that you do or who you are, that's a good thing to think about, Like, it's good to just be able to apologize to somebody. But if you apologize too much for who you are, that's a good thing to think about too, because you don't actually need to apologize to anybody ever. But you should give yourself a choice in both directions. Give yourself the choice to do something like that, and give yourself the choice not to. Because if you go through life thinking there's only one way to do things, that's how judgment works fundamentally. Is if you create a paradigm that only works in one sort of path, like, that's how judgment works. And it doesn't mean that you have to open yourself to every possible path. But if you open yourself up to every path and then go, oh, well, there are a lot I'll never go down because it's not me, that's a way of not opening yourself to every path, in a sense. But what happens if you do that is that then when you look at somebody else and you see them going down the path that you decide not to go down, you won't judge them for it. You'll understand that to them, that's a valid path in that moment in their life for whatever reason. You'll understand that they were just going to behave that way anyway, because that's who they're being. And you can understand that they could perhaps benefit from some perspective, and you can offer that to them with your thoughts. And it's up to them if they want to take it or not. Like, that's how perspective works. And they might keep going on doing whatever they're doing, and it might hurt other people. And you might look at that and you might go, okay, I have an option. I can be really angry at them as a person, or I can just look at the fact that they're hurting people and I go, well, this needs to be addressed somehow, because each individual in society affects society, so society has to do something about that individual if they're, hurting people. And that's where, like, interventions come in. People get feedback from the community. Somebody says something. They go, hey, I don't like the way you're doing things. Or, if you do something, like, really bad, the police come and they pick you up and they take you away. Unless you're Donald Trump and you just go straight to the highest office because the world is stupid. Anyway, that's, I think, one last thing. I should say something about feelings, since I was going to end about perspective. But But as far as feelings go, I think it's important to validate your feelings. And if you have negative feelings, it's important to validate those. But after you validate them, it's important to know that you can let those go. And that feelings are about having positive feelings. I don't mean being like really excited about everything that happens, but what I mean is that ultimately your feelings can enter into a completely positive state because it's not a factor of what the world is doing. It's a factor of what you're doing in your heart with what the world is doing. There is a way to have a positive heart relationship to the world and a feeling relationship to it. And it's just about knowing where you stand when stuff happens and how to be yourself in the presence of every event that occurs and in the presence of every thought you can encounter from yourself and other people. And so that's what I have to say. And and one last thing, which is that there is always a path to heal your feelings too, even if it feels like there is not. There is a way if you just keep looking for it. The answers will come if you make your mind and your mission and your objective about feelings, about healing, there is a way to complete all of the aspects of that journey in your life. And it is worth going on that journey, both for yourself and for other people. Like people say to be yourself in society, and that is important. But the way that I would put it, in addition to that, because you do have to learn how to express who you are, how to be excited to be you, how to be excited to have your thoughts and feelings to share with other people. That's how you get into society, into the social body, and you take part in it, you take place in it. Be excited to share what you have to share. And don't be afraid of other people's thoughts and don't be afraid of their feelings. And at the same time, as you're excited to share what you have to share, be excited to heal yourself. Because when you heal yourself, that's what you offer to everybody. You offer your healed heart to the world, and then it can receive your wholeness, essentially, your health, your well-being, your deep felt happiness, and your ease that comes with that. I feel like there's one more thing to say. Let me think here. And then you can bring the joy of the whole world to your heart from that place. And what I mean by that is that the heart is something that's internal to you. It's who you are in your heart, of course. And that's a personal thing. It's a private thing. You don't exactly share it with other people. They can feel it. They can pick up on it empathetically or vibrationally. And that can have a healing influence on them. It can have a healing impact and a healing feeling for them in their lives. For those who are sensitive to that sort of thing. But everybody kind of gets it a little bit. If somebody's really comfortable, really feels themselves in their heart. But often there's a conflict, or there's a separation between like what is in our hearts and how we feel in our hearts, which is a private, individual thing. And like this is why people don't like being alone sometimes, because it's like their heart it hurts if they're alone, they're with themselves, and they feel like there's nobody to share that feeling of who they are with, like if they're a feeling person. But that is an internal thing. And it can be external when you're, through the act of feeling, which is like kindness, for example. That's how you give from your heart to somebody else. You can be very heart connected and give to other people through kindness. But your feelings are something you feel with yourself, and it's who you're sitting with when you're by yourself, is your heart, essentially. But when you're with other people, if you're not reaching out to them through the acts of the heart, like kindness, again, like in society, I mean, when you're with other people in society, I don't mean at home, right? But if you're reaching out to them through acts of the heart, they can receive that. But otherwise, you're just being a person in society. And it can be hard for a lot of people to be a heart-centered person in the world if the world seems too rough, you know? And so that's kind of what I'm talking about, is that there's a way to be among people. And the way to be among people, because people are so contentious, is like sticks and stones will break my bones, but words will never hurt me. Like you go around, it's all just, you know, it's water off your back. I'm thinking of the wrong aphorism, but it's just water rolling down your back, right? So it doesn't mean anything to you. It doesn't matter to you once you get in that state. For me, sometimes I've been afraid if I say certain things that people will reject me because I have certain thoughts and feelings that people just, like, they're geared against. Basically, if people tell me this, hearing something is offensive to them, it's almost automatically funny. It's like, I can't hear that without laughing, because offense is, it's like such a nonsensical thing to me. It doesn't make sense to go around getting offended by stuff. It's like looking at somebody and going, the way that you do things bothers me. Like, how could you think that way? How could you be that person? How dare you be that person? It's like, who else are they gonna be? Like, they are who they are. So they're being who they are. Like, if they're some, you know, jerk or something, like, they're being that way because they're too stupid to be anybody else. Like, they're just too unimaginative or closed-minded to be anybody else. Like, who else are they gonna be? Why would you get upset about who they are? You can take action to help fix their effect in society, and maybe even getting upset at them might help fix them in that way. It can definitely happen. But if you're really holding on to offense as a need to be offended by stuff, it's about being offended that a person is capable of thinking or behaving that way, or feeling that way, or doing those things. And that person is evidence that somebody can. So it's sort of like being offended by God. It's like, I can't believe God would make a person like this. How could all that is produce this? How could the universe make this? It's like being upset about that. And it's like, yeah, I mean, like, okay, that's a valid feeling. That's fine. Like, there's a lot of upsetting shit in the world, you know? Like, the world is super upsetting. It's very... There's a lot of disharmonious thought and behavior, and people just not really concerning themselves with the feelings and perspectives of other people. And so that's why at this level of society itself, you have to have thick skin. You have to be tougher if you want to participate, which you kind of have to. Like, you don't really have a choice. You can kind of not. You can step out and be with people who are like you and think like you and feel like you. And you go, these are my people. This is my tribe. These are the people I'm going to be with. But if you aren't really, like, making room for society, like, in your life, just being the way that it is, like, you're not interacting with them anyway. So why are you going around being upset about them? You know? Like, you can look at them and go, damn, people are stupid as hell. Or like, yeah, they're really awful to each other. They do terrible, terrible things. You can notice these things by themselves. Like, but that's just the way it is. It's like, otherwise it's like looking at a bear or the wolves and going, I can't believe a bear would do this. I can't believe that guy who went and lived with the bears, like, he was their friend, and then they ate him, you know? It's like that's a terrible experience. That's a terrible, terrible way to die. I mean, for one thing, it's like you're eaten by your friends, you know? Like, from his point of view, he was like, these bears are my friends. From the bear's point of view, they were probably like, this guy's kind of an annoyance, but like he can hang out, I guess. Then they just like lost it with him eventually, like, oh, enough of this guy or something. I don't know. I think things are brutal, but like nobody really gets upset at animals for being the way that they are, because you're like, that's just in their nature. And people have a similar nature. There's a nature in people, and part of that nature is evolutionary, and part of that evolution is weighted toward survival at all costs. It is a fight for your life, fight to survive, very primal kind of evolutionary instinct. It's in your genes, it's in your way of thinking and feeling, and sort of dealing with the realities, like the potentials of the world, right? And some people exist in society who have that coded in them, and then it just gets buried in them because they can't use it at all, but it's still there. And it's like buried as this anger and this like ferocity toward the world around them, and so they're simmering in rage. But another way to do things is you would try to protect yourself like a rabbit, like scurrying into a rabbit hole. And there are people who do that, and they try to just live in their rabbit hole and not encounter any thoughts or feelings that aren't like them. And so they surround themselves with all these similarly sensitive people with lots of boundaries and like not a lot of like latitude. And I would say not a ton of levity, because like there's a lot of funny things to notice about the world. And if you're like, I'm not going to notice like this huge broad bandwidth of them that have to do with me personally, I think you're really missing out in that sense. But essentially, the last thing I have to say about that is that if you've been burrowing, and you're hiding yourself away from the dangerous, evil world that's all scary, at least scary thoughts and feelings and people in it that aren't like you, you're not going to get destroyed by that world if you go out and interact with it. I mean, probably not. But that's the adventure in things, right? You go out and you talk to people and you do things and you see what happens. You see who you meet. You see how they think. You see how they feel. And if you go into situations, if you go in coming from a place of being like feeling vulnerable, feeling scared, feeling separated from society, and needing the comforting, reassurance of people who think like you, then go into society. Be unafraid. Go into society. And this is the funny thing, it's going to sound paradoxical, but go into society if you have felt like you've been judged or are worried of being judged by judgmental people. Go into society without being judgmental. If you talk to somebody, decide to not be judgmental no matter what they say. I mean, obviously, you need to look at people and be like, oh, am I talking to somebody who's actually dangerous? Like, that's a valid thing to try to gauge. Like, some people are out there pretty weird. But if you're not like just going and talking to like random homeless people on the sidewalk, and if you talk to a homeless person, like you do that a certain way. You walk up to the homeless person and you go, oh, I'm going to be wary of this person. They're in this situation because something fell apart in their life. Something's not working for them. So you know instinctively that you don't know how they're going to behave. It doesn't mean you reject them as a person, and in fact, you feel compassion for them. And for every angry person out there in the world, for every, contentious, like, douche, like, asshole or whatever, like, or Karen, or, just, like, whoever it is, whatever word you want to use, like, whatever word describes it for you. There were a lot of words I could have used. There were a lot of words I could have said that would make people upset, that would make people think I'm a bad person, that I find kind of funny, I don't know why, like, what the point is, why I'm saying that, what the point of saying that is. It's just, I guess I'm giving a window into who I am as a person, which is I'm more of the school of thought that's like, hey, if I say something that upsets you about how you think and feel, then you attack me, say something to upset me, see if you can do it. Like, it's a contest, let's see, because I'm not really trying to hurt anybody's feelings. I just don't have the same heavy relationship to words and thoughts and feelings that a lot of people do. They just don't matter to me. I just don't care. So that's like, there are people like that out there. Like, there aren't, I don't know, there maybe not that many. I'm not sure. I think a lot of comedians are like that. A lot of comedians have a mindset that is a lot more loose with sort of social norms and structures. And it's sort of set to not really care so much about those mores that are designed to protect people, because there is always the understanding lurking there that all of this is artificial. Society is incredibly artificial. The whole thing is an artificial construct on a lot of levels. And so even if it's like, it makes sense, the kindergarten principles, like, be nice to other people and respect other people, on some level, you know that the way that people are telling you to respect them as a rule, there's a time and place to break that rule. If people say the time and place is never, then you're like, well, that simply can't be right. There is a time and place to not say things that will hurt people's feelings. But that doesn't mean that ever saying things that would hurt someone's feelings somewhere is only the something that could be the product of a mind that's like evil or twisted or wants to hurt people, is just a bad person. Like, everybody was just destroying J.K. Rowling for her feelings about, trans women in women's restrooms. Like, it's okay for her to feel differently about that than other people. There's not some rule that says you can't have a different perspective about that. And it doesn't mean that there's an outcome that's right or wrong. I'm not, like, just because her thoughts and feelings are okay to have doesn't mean that things should go the way that she wants them to, because that's decided by society. Society decides that. But en route to that decision, there's no reason to, like, attack a person just for thinking or feeling differently. Instead, you can go, well, that's your opinion. I don't agree with it, but I respect that you have it. Fundamentally, and on some level you might not. You go, well, I don't respect it because you don't respect other people's feelings, and you don't care about how they feel or how they see things. But if that's the case, then it's not something to get mad about, I wouldn't say, because there's a level of society where what you have to do is you have to look at people and be the adult in the room. You have to go, well, if somebody else is unenlightened, if somebody else is not thinking or behaving or feeling in a way that is rational and that's healthy for the rest of society, and that is understanding toward the rest of society. And people say, people with influence especially, right? Which is why they're putting more pressure on someone like her. When her feelings are valid for people who don't have influence, people who don't have influence might feel the same way that she does. And then are their feelings valid because they don't have influence? To me, that's why it's sort of a nonsensical argument. But people would say, yeah, their feelings are not valid. Really, they'd go, their feelings aren't valid either. None of these people's feelings are valid. I sort of lost the train of thought that I was going with there. But the point is that if you're being, that's what I was going to say, if you're going to be the adult in the room, essentially, then what that means is that you understand that everybody is at different stages of development along their human path toward reaching the place where they are meant to arrive as a complete integrated whole. And you want to tend to them at the level of allowing them every step in their path. And one way of allowing those steps is to provide the steps. And sometimes people think they have the steps when they don't. They go, this is the way to look at things. This is the way to feel. This is how to behave and think. And until you accept that, you aren't taking the step. And that is not often the case, because there is not really a way to think, and there is not really a way to feel. But there are better ways to think and feel than you do. And if you want to say that's the way to think and feel, then that means taking everything into account, accepting all of it as something that exists, and then integrating it, responding to it, understanding that just because you don't have a flaw in you doesn't mean that somebody else's struggle with that thing is invalid. Because we have all had things that we wanted to change. And if you want to change something that's like a really hard thing, like it's really set and it's like makes you feel kind of evil or something like that, like inside, it's like, man, if you're really struggling with stuff, like, wow, that's you know, yeah, like you might be lashing out, you might be doing terrible things, you might just feel bad and not even realize it. Like, who knows what somebody like that is going through? Like, if you can reach out to them with your heart, even if you don't reach out to them with your words, then that is a gift of the Spirit, and it is a blessing. Because when they come to you, in whatever form, as the perspective of somebody who's kind of like them, but is maybe suffering less, or just as perspective, like the harshness of the perspective itself that somebody might be saying because they kind of think that way or feel that way. But it's not coming from that deep place. Then you'll take the time to like pause and try to reach out, you know, like say something to make them feel connected, because a lot of what people need in society is connection. That's the thing that they're missing. And so if you connect to them, that can be